Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
The husband found out about the situation with one of the men and her wife, and here's how he reacted. Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. Some people say that writing down your thoughts is good therapy. At least, that's what my psychologist says, so I'm going to try. What have I to lose that I haven't already lost? My name is Carrie Ann Walker. I'm 35 years old and a divorced mother of 3, 10-year-old twin boys and an 8-year-old daughter. I work full-time as an ER nurse and have done so since graduating from medical school. Most people find me very attractive and say that I could easily become a model. At 5 feet tall and 100 pounds, my body is very toned with just the right amount of curves. I have reddish blonde hair and green eyes. My future ex-husband used to just look into my eyes and perk up. I miss this in him so much. I live in a small town, which is also the district center. There's a big city attitude here but a small town intimacy. The hospital where I work is the only one in the area and, as such, a fairly large institution associated with the state university's medical school. Many medical students come here to learn by doing. The hospital ER is very busy, and I work with a lot of good people. This is where I met my husband when I first started working here. I set my sights on finding a doctor and becoming a kept woman every time a new batch of medical students or doctors came in. I would evaluate them. Some of my girlfriends and I would invite them out for drinks after work while trying to find the right man. I dated a few of them and was close to a couple. In the end, I wanted to get married, and no one wants to marry. Some married nurses mocked us and said that we were like hungry vultures ready to pounce on their prey. One of the people who took a piss was my friend Joni. Joni was married and had 2 children. Her husband worked as a firefighter for the county fire department. She and her husband lived on her family's farm outside of town. The farm had belonged to her mother since her father died several years ago. My father was also a firefighter and died while on duty. He saved several people and returned to the burning building to find more victims. When the roof collapsed, he was able to lead his team out, saving them, but he was unable to save himself. The county erected a monument to him and even named a park in his honor. Everyone knew who John Walker Sr. was and what a great hero he was. Many families remained together thanks to his heroism. Joni also had a brother, John Joe, who lived on the farm and followed in his father's footsteps. He became a paramedic firefighter and worked on a farm on his days off. One day, while listening to Joni making fun of us girls, I asked her what she had against marrying a doctor. Joni replied, "Nothing, but every doctor I've seen here has been a weakling. They would never get their hands dirty and looked for a young nurse as decoration and to satisfy their needs." Joni continued, "I prefer a real man, one who works hard to provide for his family, who fights the devil himself to protect his family." I said, "That's only in fairy tales." Joni replied, "Thank God I live in this fairy tale every day because my husband is like that." She said, "One day you will find and marry some doctor. You will spend your life worrying about some other nurse like you who will try to take him away. Look around and see how many of these doctors are divorced." I have to admit, it got me thinking. I didn't want to be one of those wives waiting for the axe to fall on them. A couple of days later, I met her brother John Joe for the first time. He walked into the emergency room with a patient, and I almost fell. John was about 6 feet tall, and even in uniform, it was clear that he was a very muscular and well-built man. He had dark brown hair and forest green eyes. He walked in with confidence. I have never felt such intense interest in anyone. I noticed that he was very friendly with Joni, so I asked her who he was. Joni looked at me and said, "This is my little brother." I asked Joni, "Why haven't I seen him before?" She replied, "He usually works on a rescue vehicle, not an ambulance, but today he was replacing someone." I told Joni, I would like to meet him. She looked at me for a second, then said, "Look, Carrie, I value you as a friend, but I love my brother. I won't introduce him to you because I won't let you use him and then hurt him. When Mr. Right doctor shows up, forget about it." And she left. Forget it, damn it. I approached him and started a conversation. I don't even remember what I said. By the time he left, I felt like I was making progress and would probably see him again soon. Later that day, I met some doctors I knew and hinted that I would like to see him more often. They took the hint and called John. Now it was a waiting game to see if he would contact me. I have to say, I had some interesting dreams about him. A few days later, Joni came up to me and told me that JN had been asking about me. I asked Joni what she told him. Joni replied, "I told the truth, but John is a grown guy, and if he wants to date you, it will be his decision." Of course, I was delighted, but Joe warned me, saying, "Just don't you dare offend him, I will never forgive you for this." Several days passed, and I didn't hear anything from JN. Joni invited me to a barbecue and mentioned that JN would be there. What she didn't tell me was that there would be several available women there. All day at the barbecue, several women tried to get John's attention. It seems I wasn't the only one who wanted his attention. Finally, I got lucky and saw John heading inside to use the bathroom. I followed him, and when he came out, I stopped him. I asked him if he was trying to avoid me. John said, "Well, I heard that you wanted to meet me, but Joni told me that you were fixated on finding a doctor so you could get married. I'm not going to compete with anyone for a woman's love. Either she loves me and only me, or I will leave." I replied, "What made you think that I cannot love one man and one man only? This is exactly what I'm looking for. I want to get married and have a family, but most importantly, I want to stay married and grow old together." John looked at me for a minute, then said, "Okay, if you want to meet, how about tomorrow night?" I smiled and said, "How about tonight?" John agreed. I decided this guy might be worth it, so I started slow. We met and had a good time. After the third date, I let him kiss me goodbye. On the fifth date, I invited him to my apartment, and we had a very passionate makeout session. I didn't let him go beyond some obvious caresses. On our sixth date, John and I discussed where we were going. I explained to John that I had strong feelings for him, but I wasn't going to be just another mark on his bedside. I needed to know where this was going. To say I had strong feelings was an understatement. I was completely unconditionally in love with him. I have never met a stronger but at the same time gentle person in my life. He made me laugh, and when he wasn't around, I cried. He was kind and respectful. He was everything I never knew I really wanted. John explained to me that he wouldn't just sleep around either. He had to care for that person he wanted. He wanted this man to care about him and only him. He asked me if I was that kind of person. I took John's hand and led him to my bedroom. As I started to undress, John said, "Before we do this, I want to know, are you giving up on your dream of catching the doctor and being together exclusively?" I kissed him and said yes to everything. I wish I could say we had great intimacy that night, but that wouldn't be true. We made love, and it was amazing. My heart stopped with passion. When we finally finished, I snuggled into his tight embrace. I cried. If I wasn't in love with him before, I definitely am now. I've never experienced anything like this in my entire life. John left early, as he had a shift. When we woke up, when he left, I wrapped myself in sheets to prolong his scent. His scent was on everything. Later in the morning, John sent me a message, "Thank you for a wonderful evening. I hope it was as special for you as it was for me." I replied to his message, "John, I hope I'm not scaring you, but I love you." John replied, "I love you too." When I received his answer, my legs gave way, and I sat on the floor sobbing. I don't know what he did to me, but I'm so in love with him. I have never felt such a feeling. I must say, he has the body of Hercules, the mind of Einstein, the wisdom of Solomon, and the compassion of the Dalai Lama, all rolled into one. I've never met such a person before. The next day, I went to work in seventh heaven. Everyone noticed that I was in seventh heaven. Joni finally caught up with me and gave me a stern look. Then she said, "If you break his heart, I will kill you. Now, let's hug." After that day, John and I were inseparable. I gave up my desire to be a doctor's wife for something much better. We dated for a year, and every day, I felt more and more in love than I could have imagined. My parents adored him, and I really think John's mother loved me too. Joni actually softened up to me and even apologized for not wanting to set me up with John. One day at work, Joni told me that an ambulance was arriving and we needed to prepare a room for a patient. The paramedics brought a stretcher and John was on it. I almost fainted. I ran up to them and screamed, "Oh my God, what happened?" When John sat down and said, "I'm tired of being without you. Will you marry me?" I was so stunned that I stood in silence until the entire ambulance fell silent. Tears began to fall from my eyes when I realized that John had just proposed to me. I jumped up on him, nodding my head because I couldn't even say the words. He held out the ring and said, "Carrie, say something." Finally, I was able to squeeze out, "Yes." We got married, and I moved into John's house with his mother. This was not a problem since the house was large. Joni and her husband lived on the farm too, but in a separate house. Soon, I became pregnant, and we had twins. John's mother was wonderful and helped me with the kids, so I was able to go back to work after I finished breastfeeding them. A couple of years later, I became pregnant again, and this time we had a girl. John's mother was there to help. I thank God every day for the wonderful life I had. 10 wonderful years passed, and we settled into a routine. John and I were still working, and on his days off, John helped out on the farm with Joni's husband. John's mother still lived with us and was starting to slow down a lot due to age. I really didn't understand how everything fell apart because I was happy and felt protected in my family. John and I were still having exciting intimate, and I was still crazy in love and infatuated with John. I think it all started when some young nurses started going out for drinks after work and invited me to go with them. Joni always refused, saying that being in a bar without her husband was no place for a married woman. I never worried about it because I knew I loved John and no one would come between us. So, a couple of times a week, I would stop by for a drink or two and then head home. One day while out drinking with the girls, I met Dr. Ben Wilson. Ben and I dated for a while when he was studying, and he was actually one of the few doctors I slept with. He left and worked in another state, so we stopped seeing each other. Now he's back and working locally. We chatted and shared news from life. I told him about my life, and he said that he was in the process of divorce. He married a nurse, and according to Ben, she was unfaithful to him in their relationship. Ben complimented me on how I remained attractive even after having 3 children. He was nice and polite and did nothing to make me feel anxious. It seemed like every time the girls and I went out for drinks, Ben would show up. He was always polite and friendly. Yes, he complimented me, but I never felt that he was overstepping his boundaries. Sometimes he asked me to dance, and I agreed, but only for quick dances. One night while the girls and I were at the bar, Ben came in and started buying us all drinks. He said his divorce was finalized, and he was celebrating that evening. I drank more than usual and lost track of time a little. Ben asked me to dance, and I agreed. We danced 3 fast dances, and then a slow melody began. I turned to leave the dance floor, but Ben grabbed my hand, turned me towards him, and said, "Please, for old time's sake, I really need a friend right now." So, I danced with him. Maybe it was the alcohol, I don't know, but I should have heard alarm bells ringing. As we danced, he told me how depressed he was about his divorce and how, even though she cheated on him, he felt like a failure. He just really needed a friend right now, and he didn't know anyone in the city yet. I stayed and drank even more, danced even more. When it was time to leave, I had drunk more than I should have and knew I couldn't drive. I went outside to clear my head, and Ben followed me. It was a little chilly outside, so Ben put his arm around my shoulders. The next thing I remembered is that he kissed me, and I think I kissed him back. He took me to his car and pulled me into the back seat. I screamed at him to stop. I tried to push him away from me. He tried to cover my mouth, but I bit his hand, drawing blood. The more I struggled, the more turned on he became. I screamed, "Why? Why did you do this to me?" Ben laughed and said, "You were always so prim, but you're just another." At that moment, the car door swung open, and a couple of nurses I was with pulled Ben out and started beating him. The police soon arrived. I told them how Ben attacked me and how I fought to get rid of him. The nurses also told them how they heard me scream and saw me fight. They even saw a bite on Ben's hand. I was taken to the hospital for examination, and Ben was arrested. You want to talk about embarrassment? The ambulance that arrived was from the fire department, so now everyone will know. They took me to the hospital, and everyone there knew. I was in the hospital for about 2 hours when John showed up. He was not allowed to see me until the detectives finished questioning me. Even though I told Ben that I didn't want to have a night, I couldn't explain why I took off my clothes. Besides, several people saw me kissing Ben, and it seemed like I was willing to get into his car. They charged Ben but said the DA could drop the charges. John drove me home and waited patiently for me to tell him what happened. The next day, I sat down with him and told him everything I could remember. John was furious. He said that I had no business dancing with another man. I told John the first thought he might have put something on me, and I knew they had taken blood samples to check. Things were bad between us for a few weeks. I needed John, and Jan wasn't there for me. Joni and John's mother tried to console me, but even they said it was my own fault since I had no business even going to a bar without my husband. Eventually, the DA contacted us and met with John and me. He decided he couldn't prove Ben's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. He said the blood test came back negative for controlled substances, and although he believed me, he was afraid the jury would side with Ben since several witnesses had seen me dancing with him, kissing him, and willingly getting into the back seat with him. He was afraid the jury would think I regretted having an intimate. This meeting, so to speak, drove the nail into the coffin. John left home. He told me that he needed time away from me. I promised him that I loved only him and that I was sorry for what happened. Joni and his mom supported me and gave me the strength to continue. John still came to the farm every day to work and see the children, but he never came to the house or spoke to me. I know he was talking to Joni and Mom, but when I approached him, he just walked away. I cried myself to sleep every night. Joni and my mom tried to get him to forgive me and keep our family together, but a few weeks later, I was served with divorce papers. For the sake of the children, John wanted me to stay with my mother on the farm until the children were 18, at which time I would have to move. He also paid child support and household bills. Otherwise, I was alone. John sued Ben, and Ben quickly settled the case just to avoid trial. I don't know how much money John received, but he used it to create a prepaid education fund for the children. I was struggling with the divorce and requested counseling. The judge agreed, and we went to counseling for the next 6 weeks. I admitted my indiscretion and even took a polygraph test, which proved that I did not want to have a night with Ben and tried to stop it. John said absolutely nothing, he just sat there. The counselor threatened to tell the judge that John was not participating, and John said, "Go ahead." The judge called John and me back into court and told John that he would require counseling for as long as it took for John to participate. John told the judge, "Your Honor, I am a firefighter, and as such, I must trust my colleagues because my life may depend on them. My wife was my partner, and I lost that trust in her. You can force me to go to counseling, but I will never trust her again." The judge decided to allow the divorce process to continue. Jan stopped seeing a counselor, but I felt it would be helpful for me to understand why I did this. After a few sessions, my counselor Mike began telling me that no matter what, John would never come back and that I should move on with my life. In fact, Mike made several statements criticizing John and denigrating him. One day at home, I started talking bad about John, and John's mom got angry and asked where I got it from. I told her. Mike said the same thing. She said, "Who is Mike?" I told her, "That's my counselor." Then she said, "Since you call your counselor by name, I think something is wrong here. You love John, and he loves you. Why do you think he wants you to stay in this house and not kick you out?" The next few sessions with Mike were more about moving on, even though that was the last thing I wanted. Mike told me he wanted to observe me in a public place in a social setting to see how I behaved. This confused me because I had never heard of such a thing, but Mike said that to understand why I did it, it would be helpful to see how I behaved in such an environment. I agreed to meet him on Friday. We were supposed to meet at his office, and he was supposed to drive because he wanted to see how alcohol affected me. On Friday, I met Mike, and we went to a club in a nearby town. I had a few drinks, and Mike talked me into dancing. After a few dances, we sat down, and Mike bought another drink. The next thing I remember, I woke up in the hospital. There was a policeman standing next to me who wanted to get my statement. I really couldn't tell him anything because my mind was blank. The next morning, a detective came into my room and explained what had happened. It looks like Mike slipped something into my last drink, and when I passed out, he took me away in his car. But a good Samaritan prevented him from further harm. They found the substance on him, and Mike even admitted to his plans to seduce me. He told the detective that he had been trying to seduce me for weeks, but I didn't even give in to his hints because I still loved my husband. He then planned to make me think I had consensual night with him. A good Samaritan noticed him slipping something into my drink, and as Mike led me to his car, the Samaritan intervened to protect me until the police arrived. By the time the police arrived, the Samaritan had beaten Mike pretty badly. All this shocked me greatly. Now I was completely on edge. Thank God for Joni and Mom. I decided that I needed to get my act together and allowed John to continue with the divorce process. You see, I wasn't going to give up trying to get John back. I needed some time. We went back to court, and the judge still didn't want to approve the divorce. I told the judge that I wanted a divorce now because I understand that John no longer trusts or loves me like he used to. He said that he had never seen two people love each other more. Otherwise, why wouldn't John have done what he did to protect me? I didn't understand. The judge said, "Carrie, it was John who prevented the attack by that consultant. John's mom told him something was wrong, so John hid a recorder in your purse. He listened to Mike's attempt to seduce you. He was at the bar the night Mike carried out his plan. I think if J.N. didn't love you, he wouldn't be there for you." The judge then decided to approve the divorce with one condition. He said the divorce would become final in a year if they didn't find a way to save their family. The divorce would also become final if either of them began a relationship with someone other than their spouse. This means that if they start dating or have an intimate contact with someone else, I will assume that they are not willing to save their marriage. So, I found myself in limbo, working, taking care of the kids, trying to get my head together, and mostly loving John from afar. I found a new women's counselor and gradually began to come to my senses. John at least started talking to me and was usually polite. I explained to John that I still loved him and would do anything to get him back. I told him that if the divorce continues, it will be because he wants it, not me. I also told him that even though I was in a situation I shouldn't have been in, I never wanted to have a night with Ben or anyone else. I also told him that I would honor our marriage vows for the rest of my life. This means I won't have a night with anyone other than him, so he better hurry up and decide to at least be friends with benefits because it will be really hard for me to never have intim again. John said we'd see and left it at that. Some of the younger nurses at work started paying attention to John when he brought a patient into the ER, and I told them that even though we were divorced, I would claw their eyes out if they touched him. One of the nurses even said, "Well, I'll keep my hands to myself, but I can't speak for the rest of my body." Divorce was the worst event of my life until the day history tried to repeat itself. I was working at EMS when the fire dispatcher informed us that they were preparing to receive multiple casualties due to a building fire. One sheriff said a large residential building was on fire on the city's west side. I knew John was working on a heavy rescue vehicle today and would be at that fire. The sheriff said a news helicopter was flying over the area and providing a live feed. Joni and I went to the break room to look, since Joni's husband was captain of the same rescue team as John. The building was completely engulfed in flames, and we saw several people being treated on the ground. Then the worst happened. We saw the roof collapse. The helicopter reporter said he believed firefighters were still in the building, and then the station went off the air. The announcer announced that it was station policy not to show potential injuries until families had been notified. One of the sheriffs working security at the ambulance switched his radio to the fire department frequency, and everyone listened. The radio clicked, "Beep beep beep. Attention all units responding to the fire on Maple Street, evacuate the building and report, we listen carefully. Sector A to the commander, everything is fine with us. Sector B to the commander, we're fine. Sector C to the commander, we're still counting. Sector D to the commander, we're fine. Sector C, commander, are you okay? Sector C, negative, we are -4. Rescue Group 1 has not reported." Both Joni and my eyes filled with tears. Then we heard a message that made us freeze. Mayday, mayday, mayday. The rescue team is alone in the trap. Our firefighters are knocked out. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Rescue team leader alone. What is your location? Commander, we are on the second floor of Sector C, near the back wall. The collapse of the roof blocked us in the first apartment from Sector D. Commander, got it, hold on. Commander to dispatcher, start a general call and send the 4th and 5th alarms. Send all resources to Sector C and give me 2 RIT commands. Also, send me 5 additional medical teams. Dispatcher, got it. At this time, Joni and I were crying, and everyone was trying to console us. It seemed like an eternity before we heard the next radio message. Commander from RIT-1, we're hearing multiple man-on-the-ground signals, we're getting close. Commander from RIT-1, we have found Rescue Team 1. We have 3 that we are evacuating and 1 is very blocked. Let RIT-2 help. RIT-2, Commander, help RIT-1. Break, medical team, Commander, I want my people out of there as quickly as possible. We waited, about 10 minutes passed before the hospital and medical radio came back to life. Medic 3, district reception from the district. Medic 3, we are en route to your facility with a 24-year-old male firefighter who was trapped in a roof collapse while working on a fire. The patient is semi-conscious, suffering from severe smoke inhalation. Vital signs are stable, we are transmitting T and will treat as per protocol. District, copy for Medic 3. Give the patient a cyanide antidote. What is the patient's last name? Medic 3, copy orders. Patient name Miller. ETA 7 minutes. Then we heard, Medic 7 to the district. District reception, Medic 7. We have a 43-year-old firefighter with the same information as Medic 3's patient. We are transmitting telemetry and treating as per protocol. ETA 8 minutes. We'll begin antidote administration unless you cancel. Patient last name is Wilson. We will release the radio as other units will follow us. Medic 7, from the district, copy and continue as directed. At this moment, Joni perked up as it was her husband. The chief told Joni and me that we were off duty, and he requested help from the IQ to relieve us. We were still waiting as my John was still there, then came the next call. Medic 4 to district, we have a 28-year-old firefighter who is conscious and alert. We are treating for smoke inhalation and will follow protocol and administer antidote. ETA 8 minutes. Patient last name is Hadlock. I fell to the floor, realizing that my John was still trapped. Everyone tried to console me, even Joni was devastated again. Joni started screaming, "It's not fair. First my father, and now my brother." We were taken to a room, and soon the hospital priest approached us. We continued to wait for any news. The ambulances started arriving, and Joni and I ran up to Joni's husband. By then, he had regained consciousness. He looked at Joni with tears in his eyes and said, "John saved us. John saved us all, but we couldn't get to him. I'm so sorry. It was just like when your dad saved us years ago, baby. I'm so sorry, I promised I wouldn't let anything happen to him." Then the doctors pushed us out of the room. I looked at Joni and said, "I didn't know your father saved your husband." Joni nodded her head and said, "The last thing he said was, 'You won't widow my daughter. Tell her and my wife that I love them.'" This really shook him up for a while. God, I pray John doesn't die. This will really shake him up again. Then we heard the radio again, Medic 1 to the district appointment with Dr. 1 County. We're bringing you a 34-year-old firefighter with ventricular fibrillation. Cardiopulmonary recovery has begun. The patient is intubated and we have 2 IVs hooked up. We'll follow protocols for the treatment of ventricular fibrillation. The patient also has a fracture of the right femur with suspected injuries to the head, spine, and pelvis. ETA 7 minutes. The patient's last name is Walker. As a nurse, I knew John's chances of survival were small. According to the report, anyone who was in cardiac arrest due to injury before arriving at the hospital has only about a 1% chance of living. At that moment, I prayed to God and made all kinds of deals with the Almighty to save John's life, not for my sake, but for the sake of the children. I know I missed my chance, so for the first time in my life, it wasn't about my happiness but about someone else's. I saw the fire department chaplain walk through the door. He saw me and came over to comfort Joni and me. The ambulance arrived and John was quickly carried out of the car. I noticed that no one was performing artificial respiration on him. I tried to approach him when I heard one of the paramedics say, "We've got his heart rate back up," as they rushed him to the trauma bay. Joni and I followed them, but were not allowed inside. Doctors and nurses examined him and worked on him. X-ray burst through the door. I had never seen so many doctors in one room. There was a traumatologist, a cardiologist, a pulmonologist, a kidney specialist, an orthopedist, a radiologist, and our neurosurgeon. While the X-ray did its job, the ER doctor talked to Joni and me. He explained that he would not know anything until he received the results of the X-ray. He said John was unconscious and his prognosis was not good. Joni and I hugged. As I saw the chaplain pull out a purple table, I knew it was used for last prayers. I screamed, "No!" He came over, took my hand, and calmly said, "Carrie and Joni, I want to give John my last prayers. This doesn't mean he won't survive, but I think if God decides to take John to himself, he would be glad if only his loved ones were with him." Then he looked straight at me and said, "Carrie, don't think for a second that John doesn't love you. We've talked a lot about your situation, and I can assure you that he never stopped loving you." Around this time, John's mother walked into the emergency room. We told her about John's condition and that the chaplain wanted to offer his final prayers. We advised her to wait outside. She looked at us and said, "When the fire department truck pulled up, I already knew. Don't forget, the chaplain and I have been through this before. I already buried my husband, and if God decides, I'll bury my son." We all entered the room, which was now silent except for the beeping heart monitor. I stood to John's left, and Joni stood to his right, and we held his and Mom's hands as the chaplain said his final prayers. For a moment, I thought I felt him squeeze my hand. When the chaplain finished, we went outside, and the head ER doctor approached us. He said, "We have received X-ray results and found he has no injuries to his head, neck, spine, or pelvis. He has a serious fracture to his right hip and is losing blood. We want to operate, but we are afraid his heart is still too weak. We'll try to stabilize him, and if all goes well, we'll operate tomorrow. We've made a request for blood since we'll need a lot to keep him going until surgery. Once he's stronger, he should regain consciousness on his own." John was transferred to intensive care. I told my mom that I needed to pick up the kids, but she said, "Don't worry, the kids are fine. You need to stay with your husband." I hung my head in shame. Mom lifted my chin and said, "You violated his trust once. Now he needs you. Don't break it again." I looked my mom in the eyes and said, "Mom, I swear to you, I will never hurt your son again. I will be by his side until the end of my days." She kissed my forehead. I went to the cafeteria to buy coffee for myself and Joni. I was shocked to see a line stretching down the hallway and into the waiting room of firefighters and police officers, all waiting to give blood. Tears started streaming down my face again, and in that moment, I truly understood what it meant to trust that your partner would be there for you. This is why John and I made no progress in repairing our relationship. I didn't understand the depth of trust one had broken. These firefighters, John's partners, had his back. They would never betray him, but I did. I understand now. I went to the chapel to pray and made a promise to God that I would earn John's trust back and would never break that trust again. Joni spent the night with her husband, and I spent the night at John's bedside. My parents came and picked up the kids, and everyone agreed to go back for surgery by morning. John gained some strength and began to come to his senses. They began to take him to the operation when he extended his hand to me. I leaned in to kiss him, and he whispered, "Carrie, I forgive you. Will you forgive me?" I replied, "Yes, John, I forgive you, and I still love you." Then he said, "I wish I had accepted your offer of being friends with benefits, because it looks like I'll have to go a long time without intimate." I don't know why, but I started crying again. He was taken away for surgery. The operation lasted only 3 hours, after which the doctor came out to meet everyone with a big smile. He said, The operation was successful. You'll be able to see him in a couple of hours." He went on to explain that barring any complications, John would be in the hospital for the next couple of weeks and then be able to go home, but would be in a hip cast and have limited mobility for about another 8 to 10 weeks. He won't be able to climb stairs, which means his apartment will be inaccessible. I said, "John, you should move back into the house. I will use maternity leave to care for a sick family member." Mom patted my hand, and Joni smiled. The first night was a little awkward, as John wanted to talk. He said he wasn't sure if we should sleep together because it might send the wrong message to the kids. John said that although he had forgiven me, he had not forgotten everything. I told him I understood. I quickly left the room so John wouldn't see me cry. Mom was wonderful. She hugged me and then told me to come back and tell John that I needed to sleep next to her in case she needed her at night. We would decide what to do with the children when the time came. I did so, and we slept together for the first time in a year. There were still 3 months left before the divorce was final, so I had work to do on my own. I asked the court to grant a deferment for another 3 months. John's injury and rehabilitation were most important, and I insisted to the judge that he allow me to bring John to full recovery. John did not object, so the judge granted the request. John didn't really need much help, which left me a lot of time to think. I mostly thought about how stupid I was and how I didn't see the temptation coming. I started reading about how people succumb to temptation and started my own online support group for people who have gotten divorced because of seduction. From my group, I read hundreds of stories about how they were victims of seduction. I decided to put all this into print and create a book to help women recognize and prevent unwanted seduction. I called the book The Deceiver's Guide. When I finished, I sent it to a publisher who helped me edit it. They published the book and gave me a small check until they saw how the book would sell. The book was a huge success and was reprinted several times. It even made it onto the bestseller list. The publisher started sending me large royalty checks, and I even received an invitation to appear on The Ellen Show to discuss my book. 6 months with John were almost over, and the divorce was supposed to be officially finalized the day I appeared on The Ellen Show. I didn't need to be in court, as it was just a formality. Despite all my efforts, John always said that he had not forgotten. On the day of The Ellen Show, I tried to remain in a good mood, but inside, I was broken. Ellen was kind and cheerful. We discussed the book and the reasons why I wrote it. I talked about how I was the victim of a seducer and how it cost me my marriage. I told the whole terrible story of what happened. I explained that I wanted to give women the knowledge to prevent what happened to me and thousands of other women so that it would never happen again. I explained that I called the book The Cheater's Handbook because it read like a sports manual. It shows step-by-step methods that seducers use. I told Ellen and the audience about how I had a fairy tale marriage and how deeply I was in love with my husband. I never imagined that I would become a victim of a seducer. To this day, I wish I could turn back time, but the reality is how I ruined not only my life, but the lives of my husband and children. Ellen asked me how I was coping with the situation. I explained that I was going to be the best parent I could be to my children and make sure they knew they were conceived in love, that their father was a wonderful husband and father, and that I was the one who failed the family. Ellen said, "Aren't you being too hard on yourself?" I replied, "No, Ellen. To this very day, on this very day when our divorce becomes final, I love my husband with all my heart. I know deep down that he still loves me, but I broke his trust, and no matter how much love you have, without trust, a relationship will not survive." Ellen then asked, "What advice would you give to our audience?" I said, "First of all, you may not agree with me, but if you are in a relationship or marriage, do not go to bars without your husband. These seducers are looking for connections in bars, and the message they convey is that if you are in a bar without your husband, you are free prey. Bars aren't the only place, but remember, if you wouldn't do something in front of your husband, then you probably shouldn't do it. Secondly, if any man tries to humiliate your husband in front of you or in your presence, he has evil intentions and is trying to create discord in your relationship." Ellen asked, "What would you tell your husband if you could tell him anything now?" I replied, "I would tell him how sorry I am and that no matter what happens, I will always love him." Then Ellen gave me a surprise. She said, "Honestly, I think there are women who think your husband is wrong." In the end, you tried to stop the situation but were forced to break your promises. I want to give him the opportunity to tell you what he would like to say." Then the audience screen and monitor in front of me lit up, and John appeared on them. He said, "Hi Ellen. I want to congratulate Carrie on the success of her book, and I want to tell her." At that moment, the screen suddenly became covered with static, and the image and sound became confused. Ellen turned to the producers and asked, "What's going on?" They replied, "Just a minute, we lost the signal." I didn't know that John was in the studio at the time. As I sat waiting, John came up behind me. Then I heard John's voice from the monitors as if he was standing next to me. "I want to tell Carrie that I still love her and want her back in my life if she will accept me." Hearing this made me cry. I couldn't say a word, but I nodded my head, and finally, I was able to say, "There is nothing in my life that I would like more than to have you back." Ellen said, "Well, don't tell me, turn around and tell John." On that, I turned around, and John was standing there. I jumped into his arms so quickly that I caught him off guard, and we both fell. I cried, kissed him, and promised to make him the happiest. The audience applauded and cheered for what seemed like an eternity before they stopped. Ellen said, "Carrie, you are wrong. Fairy tales do exist, and to help make yours come true, we are taking you and John on a fabulous honeymoon to the city of love, Paris, France. I also know that today your divorce becomes final, but that is also not the case because John stopped the divorce a month ago. And finally, to reaffirm your renewed commitment to marriage, the same judge who didn't want to give up on you is here to renew your marriage vows, if that's what you want." The renewal of marriage vows took place in front of a live studio audience. John brought his mother, our children, my parents, and his sister and her husband. When he found out I was going to be on Ellen's show, he contacted her and explained what he wanted to do. For the last month, everyone knew that my John would come home, except me. John later explained that he wanted to do it this way because I had selflessly exposed myself by trying to protect others by telling my story, which could expose me to public censure. He wanted to make an equally strong statement of his love for me. John made a full recovery and returned to work. He had already rented out his apartment, and we moved the bed back into our bedroom. The kids were happy that Daddy was home, and as for me, well, let's just say I'm still convinced that the nurse ogling John isn't getting anything out of him. John now says that he only goes to work to get some rest. I'm not upset that John is back at the fire station, not at all. The world needs real men like John and all the firefighters. I worry about what might happen, but I am confident that I am loved and that he is loved. I trust his brothers and sisters in the fire service to take care of each other. I know what it means to trust, and that is the ultimate commitment to each other. I have this commitment to John and my family. The honeymoon was wonderful. John and I could barely walk when we returned. I just got home from work today, and I have news for John. It looks like the family is expanding. I'm pregnant again, and the doctor thinks it will be twins. Ellen wants an update on our lives, and I think I'll tell John about it live. What do you think of our story today? In my opinion, I feel sorry only for the husband, who was in a similar situation, but soon found his happiness anyway. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. See you in the next video.